The council chamber buzzed with the quiet hum of disdain and indifference as the human ambassador took their place at the center. For decades, humanity had worked to integrate into the galactic community, playing by rules written long before their arrival. Yet, despite adhering to every law and custom, they were met with negligence and ridicule. Today was no different. The ambassador's voice was steady but laced with an edge of frustration as they began their address. Members of the council, we come before you once again, not as conquerors, not as beggars, but as equals. We bring evidence, clear and undeniable, of violations committed against our people. Colonies raided, ships destroyed, lives lost. Each time we have sought resolution through this chamber. Each time we have been ignored. A ripple of murmurs passed through the assembly. Some representatives shifted uncomfortably, while others didn't bother to feign interest. A towering, scaled delegate from the Rannoch Confederacy leaned back, mandibles clicking in a mockery of a yawn. The ambassador's gaze swept over the room, their expression unmoving. You say we are young, the ambassador continued, voice growing firmer. That we lack the understanding to navigate the complexities of interstellar politics. But youth is no excuse for how we've been treated. When our colonies were attacked by pirates, you turned a blind eye. When our trade routes were blockaded, you dismissed our pleas. And when our people, men, women, children, were slaughtered, you called it an unfortunate consequence of galactic tensions. A representative from the Ilrath Dominion, a race of pale, spindle-limbed beings, raised a hand in mock protest. Your grievances are noted, Ambassador, but the Council cannot intervene in every minor dispute. Resources are limited, and humanity is hardly the only species facing difficulties. The ambassador's jaw tightened. Minor disputes? Tell me what qualifies as minor. 100 lives? 1,000? Would it still be minor if it were your people? Or does it only become serious when the victims are not human? A brief silence fell over the chamber, the ambassador's words cutting through the air like a blade. But it was quickly replaced by the same dismissive hum, the same rehearsed apathy that had defined these meetings for years. The ambassador took a deep breath, steadying themselves before speaking again. Patience has been our virtue. We believed in your system, in your promises of unity and justice. But patience has its limits. We have asked, we have appealed, we have begged, and still you ignore us. I will say this only once more, humanity will not remain patient forever. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. A representative from the Thrika coalition, a feathered creature with eyes like molten gold, leaned forward. Is that a threat, Ambassador? The ambassador met their gaze without flinching. It's a warning? With that, the ambassador stepped back, the weight of their statement echoing in the silence that followed. The council resumed its usual proceedings, brushing aside the human delegation's concerns as they always had. But something had shifted. For the first time, the humans had made it clear, they were done asking. The news spread like wildfire across human colonies. A small outpost on the fringes of explored space, home to over 10,000 people, had been reduced to ash. Pirates, backed by a known ally of the Galactic Council, had descended without warning. No demands, no negotiations, just slaughter. Families who had ventured out seeking a better life now lay lifeless in the ruins of their dreams. Broadcasts showed charred buildings, mangled bodies, and survivors clutching one another amid the devastation. The footage was unbearable to watch, but it played on every human network, stirring something deeper than grief. Anger. Across Earth and its colonies, a single question echoed, how much more will we endure? The ambassador returned to the council, carrying the faces of the dead in their mind and the pleas of their people on their shoulders. This time there was no measured tone, no tempered restraint. The council chambers fell silent as the ambassador spoke. We warned you. We begged you. And now this. 10,000 lives snuffed out. Innocents who trusted your promises of protection. Their blood is on your hands. One of the elder species, an insectoid delegate with a voice like grinding stones, buzzed dismissively. Pirates are an unfortunate reality of interstellar expansion. The Council cannot police every frontier settlement. Perhaps humans should reconsider colonizing regions they cannot defend. The ambassador's eyes burned with barely contained fury. Reconsider? Perhaps you should reconsider your indifference. Those pirates acted with impunity because they knew they would face no consequences. Not from you, not from anyone. They are emboldened by your negligence, protected by your allies. And when we come to you for justice, you treat us as if we are the problem. A wave of murmurs rippled through the assembly, but no one moved to respond. The ambassador took a step forward. This is no longer a matter of patience or diplomacy. Humanity has tried to work within your system, but your system is broken. You call yourselves the guardians of peace, but you protect only your own interests. You turn a blind eye to suffering unless it threatens your borders. You have failed us, and you have failed the very ideals you claim to uphold. The Ilrath Dominion's representative spoke again, voice dripping with condescension. If you are unhappy with the Council's efforts, perhaps humanity should handle these matters on its own. Though I suspect your kind lacks the strength to do so. The ambassador's lips curled into the faintest shadow of a smile. Perhaps we will. And when we do, remember this moment. Remember how you mocked us, ignored us, belittled us. Because when the tide turns, and it will, you will have no one to blame but yourselves. The ambassador's words reverberated not just in the chamber, but across human networks. Back on Earth, the message was clear. Diplomacy had failed. Factories that had lain dormant for years roared to life, producing ships and weapons at a breakneck pace. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers, ready to defend their species. Engineers and scientists worked around the clock, pushing the boundaries of human innovation. This was no longer about revenge. This was about survival. About ensuring humanity would never again be so vulnerable, so disregarded. The galaxy had underestimated them for far too long. That would change, and the universe would never forget what was coming next. The first strike was swift and devastating. In a coordinated series of attacks, human forces dismantled pirate strongholds across the frontier. Outposts that had gone unchecked for decades were obliterated in a matter of hours. Human ships, smaller and less advanced than those of other species, moved with precision and ingenuity. They struck where defenses were weakest, using strategies no one had anticipated. This was not the work of desperation. It was a statement. Humanity was no longer asking for justice. They were taking it. Galactic broadcasts lit up with the news. Pirate fleets, once thought untouchable, were left in smoldering ruins. Entire supply chains, which had funded the black markets of older species, were cut off overnight. And humanity didn't stop there. Every corrupt entity that had turned a blind eye to the attacks on their colonies found themselves in the crosshairs. Shipping lanes were blockaded. Stations known to harbor criminals were infiltrated and dismantled. But humanity made one thing clear: they would not harm innocents. Every strike was broadcast live to the galaxy, showing restraint even as their enemies crumbled. Civilians were spared, and supplies were redistributed to those in need. On the surface it looked like vengeance. In truth, it was a lesson, a reminder of what justice could look like when it wasn't shackled by bureaucracy. For the first time, the galaxy began to see humanity for what they truly were. They were not the naive, desperate species the Council had dismissed. They were innovators, strategists, and survivors. Where others relied on brute force or ancient technologies, humans adapted. They turned disadvantages into strengths, outmaneuvering fleets far superior in size and power. A fleet from the Rannoch Confederacy, dispatched to deal with the human problem, met a humiliating defeat. Their warships, boasting shields and weapons centuries ahead of human technology, were undone by tactics that exploited their arrogance. Human forces disrupted communications, used decoys to draw fire, and then struck at critical points with surgical precision. By the time the Rannoch realized what was happening, their ships were scattered, their forces routed. The message was clear: humanity was no longer to be underestimated. But this was not a war of conquest. Humanity did not seek to dominate the galaxy. In every victory they emphasized their purpose. A human commander, addressing the galactic media after the destruction of a major pirate base, spoke with conviction. "We do not fight for power. We do not fight for territory. We fight because we were given no choice. We asked for justice and we were ignored. Now we will ensure no one else suffers as we have. We are not conquerors. But we will no longer be victims." The Council could no longer ignore humanity's actions. Panic rippled through the older species as they realized the scope of what was happening. The young species, the ones who had suffered under the same apathy humanity had endured, watched with growing admiration. Whispers began to spread. Perhaps, at long last, there was hope for a new kind of order in the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, the balance of power was shifting. And humanity stood at the center of it all. The Galactic Council convened in emergency session, the air thick with unease. For the first time in centuries, the assembly of elder species, so accustomed to absolute power, faced a crisis they couldn't ignore. Humanity's actions had shattered the fragile complacency of their order. The broadcasts of their victories had reached every corner of the galaxy, and with them came an undeniable truth: the Council's authority was no longer absolute. The human ambassador returned, but they were no longer pleading. This time they carried the weight of a species that had proven its strength. The murmurs in the chamber quieted as they began to speak. For decades we believed in this council. We believed in its ability to uphold justice, to protect those under its care. But time and again you have shown us otherwise. Your inaction, your corruption, your arrogance, it has left countless innocents to suffer. And when we called for aid, you dismissed us as insignificant. Now you see the cost of your neglect. Their words carried no malice, only an unyielding determination. Across the galaxy, millions watched the broadcast, humanity's voice cutting through centuries of complacency. Humanity does not seek war, the ambassador continued. We do not seek dominance. But we will no longer tolerate a system that sacrifices the vulnerable for the convenience of the powerful. We demand accountability. We demand reform. And we demand that the lives lost to your indifference are honored, not forgotten. The chamber erupted into debate, some species resisting the call for change, clinging to their old ways. But something unexpected happened. Representatives from younger species began to speak out, their voices emboldened by humanity's actions. The humans are right, declared a representative from a smaller coalition. For too long we have been ignored, silenced, left to fend for ourselves. If the council cannot protect its members, then it has failed its purpose. One by one, allies began to emerge. Species who had lived in the shadows of the older powers, now inspired to demand more. The council's once unchallenged authority began to fracture. Humanity, however, did not exploit this moment for power. Instead, they extended a hand to those who had suffered as they had. Aid ships were dispatched to struggling colonies, carrying food, medicine, and protection. Engineers worked alongside alien counterparts to rebuild what had been lost, fostering a sense of unity that had long been absent in the galaxy. In the weeks that followed, a new coalition began to form, not one built on fear or dominance but on shared purpose. Humanity stood at its heart, not as rulers but as leaders by example. Their actions spoke louder than any words, proving that strength was not in conquest but in the ability to lift others up. As the broadcast ended, a single message echoed across the stars, spoken by the ambassador but carried by the voices of billions. No species will ever forget the moment when humans finally lost their patience. Because in that moment, we reminded the galaxy what it means to fight not for power but for justice. And we will fight for it together.